Hello guys, ayan, may bagong video na naman about Diablo Immortal. It's called Diablo Immortal. Diablo 4. Na-stuck ako sa Diablo Immortal ah. It's called Gameplay Guides by Wudijo. Wudijo. Yeah. Siya yata yung nagsasalita dito. So, let's see guys kung anong meron sa gameplay guides na i-present nila. Okay. Setup natin to. Ayan. Oh wait. Tanggalin lang natin yung sound ng World of Warcraft. Okay. Tapos let's watch this. Okay, let's see. Excited na ako sa Diablo 4.
Hi everyone, my name is Wudijo, I'm a Diablo content creator and I'm here to bring you a core gameplay guide on Diablo 4. This is the first video in the series and we're gonna talk about character customization, skill trees and what makes a build work. Let's get right into it. When you're starting out for the first time in Diablo 4, you might be wondering which class should I play. There are 5 to choose from: the Barbarian, the Necromancer, the Sorcerer, the Druid and the Rogue. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses and their own flavor in how you approach them and how you play them. In the end, it comes down to what you think would suit you best, what kind of fantasy you want to play out with your character, and how you want to customize it later on as you go. As a sorcerer, you'll have access to fire, lightning, and cold spells, for example, while as a rogue, you can play melee or ranged with bow or daggers. Necromancers bring summons and their death magic. Druids have their own summons, they can transform and have elemental magic, and the Barbarian obviously jumps into the fray to wreak havoc. And each of those classes has their own set of skills that you can play around with and try to customize it to your liking. So in short, choose whatever you want and make it yours. There are many different viable options that you can play. You don't have to stick to one exact build from the start to the end, and you can always adjust things as you go. That's one of the neat features of the skill tree that allows you to reassign points on the fly for a gold cost and then assign it to something else, and you can always try to min-max your build a little bit with some different choices and try to figure out what works best for you. As you level up your character, you will unlock more skill points that you can use to spend on your skills or passive abilities, and there's also more and more legendary items, eventually unique items coming in that also change the way you play a character. One example of that could be that you started as a cold sorceress trying to make a frozen orb build, but then you find an item that gives you +1 to your summoned hydras, and suddenly you can have 2 of those hydras, which makes it obviously a very powerful choice. And maybe you want to adjust your build a little bit, unspec one of those skills that you had as a supporting option, and get in the hydra, and you can still play your cold build and combine it with this new item that you found to make
Yun yung maganda no? At least nare-respect mo yung by gold. Sana di ganun kalaki yung gold.
make your own combo. But as always, the devil is in the details and you can't always expect to get the lucky drops. So what makes a build actually work? The most important thing to consider is how are you gonna deal damage? How are you gonna defeat enemies? Because that's what Diablo is all about. You wanna slay those demons before they slay you. While the game allows you massive freedom and customization, there are definitely some guidelines you want to follow. So number 1 is you should focus on one main ability. At least most builds will have, for example, a core skill like the Frozen Orb, or on the Rogue maybe Flurry or Barrage, or on the Barbarian something like Hammer of the Ancients. And this is your main ability that you will use most of the time to deal your big damage bursts. Usually you also want to go with a basic ability that you get right at the start, at the top of the skill tree. That is just a filler ability that you can use maybe to apply certain buffs or debuffs, and just deal some extra chip damage when you have a downtime or not enough resource. Obviously there are exceptions and you don't have to stick to this concept with a core skill. You can also make, for example, a Conjuration Sorceress that has Hydra and Ice Blades and even Lightning Spear together, and then stick in an ultimate as your last ability and completely skip those core skills if you want. Or you can have a Summoner Necro. You don't really have to rely on your own abilities to deal damage and just have your minions deal damage instead. But the bottom line is that you have very limited skill slots and points to spend on the tree, so that you want to look for synergies with the few points that you have.
Okay.
You want to try to boost
Look at one
one certain
combination that
ability,
complement
or
each
maybe
other.
2 or 3 that, you know, kind of work together. Then stick in maybe other abilities that are utility choices, defensive choices, mobility, that help you out in those downtimes and act as a cooldown or as an extra tool to deal with enemies. One example for this is Rogue with the dash skill. This is really a signature ability. It allows you to move around the battlefield really quickly, reposition for better shots with your bow, or get in and out of the fight with a melee rogue. And this is really something that works in most builds. You can always stick it in. It feels good to use. You're faster while moving, while traveling, and you have a combat application for it. And then you complement the setup with maybe an ultimate ability like the Shadow Clone or the Smoke Grenade so that you can disable enemies and deal with them safely, while also having something like a Shadow Imbuement for extra AoE damage that you can activate to boost your core skill that you use as your main ability. And as I mentioned, there are these various customization options, and you can always adjust some extra skill slots the way you want it. Once you have unlocked 6 different skills and you have found the setup that you like, you can start spending more points into, for example, your core ability to boost its damage, or some of the utility choices to reduce the cooldown or increase their effects in other ways, or even go for some of those passive abilities that you can find all over the skill tree. These usually give you some kind of damage or defensive buff, or some conditional effect that helps you out with your build, and you can also try to use those to min-max your character further. Similar to a lot of the legendary items that you may find in the game, there are a lot of conditional effects that activate, for example, against crowd control targets, against vulnerable targets, against frozen targets, and these kind of things. And you always want to try to figure out how to fit them into your build. When you find this one item that gives you this massive damage bonus against stunned enemies, you might want to think about, do you want to use that? Do you want to maybe try to fit in a stun ability that can activate this buff to get a bigger burst out when you need it against an elite, for example? Or there's other items that boost your damage while you have a barrier. And maybe you want to try to figure out how to stick a barrier effect into your setup. But obviously, while the skill tree makes the core of your setup, it's not everything. And later on, you're going to unlock even more systems. So as you go, you're going to find more of these legendary items. And you also get the Paragon points later with the Paragon boards that allow you to customize your setup even further to push your build in one or the other direction. And obviously, in addition to the skills, let's not forget about the equipment of your character. This is the stuff that you're hunting for, the loot that you can find in the world. This is at the heart of a Diablo game, and it is very important here as well. Especially your weapon is your most important equipment slot. You always want to make sure that your weapon is upgraded as much as possible, the highest item power possible, and gives you the highest damage stats. Because this is what is the base value for all the other calculations of how you deal damage later on with all of your skills and additional effects. So always keep a special eye on your weapon, and whenever you find an upgrade, try to fit it into your build, because this is the most important slot. You want to make sure that all of your equipment is good, of course, but the weapon is the core. This is how you deal damage. The loot that you can find from monsters obviously improves with their level. So as you go, you're gonna find better and better loot, and you want to keep an eye out for all of your equipment slots. But in some cases, it can definitely be worth holding on to what you have for a while if it has a really good combination of stats, or for example a really good legendary ability. You should always take a closer look and not just follow the green numbers that show on the item itself. There are a lot of different stats that can roll, and not all of them apply to every build. Sometimes you get skill bonuses that you don't use, and sometimes you get damage bonuses that don't work for your main ability, and these items are not really useful. And some of these stats you can find on items are also very rare or very impactful for your current setup, or just universally useful. One example of that is movement speed on the boots. You should always try to have movement speed there, because you don't really get that much from other sources, and going fast around the world helps you both in speeding up your progression and in combat to
So only boots have that affixes movement speed.
dodge enemy abilities, for example. And lastly, we should not forget that you can also alter your items to make them more powerful. You can upgrade them at the blacksmith, you can socket gems or add sockets even at the jeweler, and most importantly, you can use the occultist to add or move legendary powers around. So you always want to try to use the occultist and imprinting of legendaries to have the best combination of legendary powers
Utilize
for your
all
current
this
setup, so that you can benefit
legendary
from
power.
the strongest ones the most. But one thing to keep in mind is that at least in the early game, you're also going to replace your items rather frequently, because you get levels quickly, you move to higher monster levels quickly,
I didn't
and
touch this
find
so
better
much
items
in
a lot
beta.
more often than later on when the progression slows down. And as I highlighted earlier, the damage output of your weapon is crucial to your character's overall attack power rating and your damage output. So you usually want to avoid putting legendary affixes on your weapon if they're really important for your setup, and instead try to put them on other items, at least in the early game while you're leveling up and replacing your weapons frequently. So to sum it up, play the character that you want and try to find your own way with it. Usually you want to stick to one main ability and maybe support it with other utility or defensive choices, or some secondary damage abilities that you can use on the side, or just play around the RNG of the loot that you find. If you have some really powerful legendary effects, you might want to use those instead, and maybe adjust your setup a little bit to make them work and fit them in. On your items, first of all, look for strong legendary effects that can boost your damage for certain skills, or look for the right stats that synergize with your current setup. And last but not
Need to
least,
farm more
always make sure to upgrade your
legendaries.
items, especially your
How about the
weapon,
set?
because this is at the heart of your damage output. If you follow these guidelines, you will have pretty good success with pretty much any character and build you choose. Obviously, some of them might turn out stronger or weaker than others, but that's also the fun part of it. The discovery, the experimentation of what works the best, and also what works the best for your playstyle. I really hope you enjoyed this guide, and I wish you good luck with your first characters in Diablo 4. If you're
Sure.
interested in any more of my content, I do have my own Twitch and YouTube channels that you can come
Oh,
check
okay.
out. And other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in Sanctuary.
Okay. About you guys. What character you will use? For me, I will use
Choices,
Rogue
defensive choices, mobility
because
that help you
it's like
activate
Demon
to
Hunter
boost your
in World of Warcraft. There's no paladin like so I don't know. I will maybe I will use Rogue for my first character. So that's it for the tips and guides from Diablo Immortal again, from Diablo 4. So thank you. See you on next video.